In 1997, an entire country collapsed. Not metaphorically, not financially, actually collapsed. Armed mobs in the streets, government buildings on fire, soldiers selling their rifles for cash. And the reason? A savings account with a 50% monthly return. That's not a typo. 50% per month. This is Albania. And this is the story of how a nation bet everything on a lie, and how their own government held the door open. To understand the scam, you have to understand the vacuum it filled. For nearly 5 decades, Albania had been the most isolated country in Europe, not just Soviet-style isolated. North Korea isolated. Their communist dictator Enver Hoxha banned private cars, banned religion, banned leaving, and built 750,000 concrete bunkers across the country because he was convinced NATO was coming. NATO was not coming. Nobody was coming. Albania was a footnote with bunkers. When communism finally collapsed in 1991, Albanians got something they had never had before: freedom, markets, and absolutely zero idea how either of those things worked. There were no banks in the Western sense, no stock market, no financial regulators worth mentioning, no consumer protection, no institutional memory of what capitalism even looked like in practice. What they did have was this: a population that had just watched their entire state-controlled economy disintegrate overnight. People with small savings, zero options, and a desperate hunger to believe that the new system, this shiny Western capitalism thing, was going to save them. That hunger was the fuel, and somebody was about to light the match. It started small and almost reasonable. A few informal lending companies popped up in the early 1990s. They called themselves investment funds. They weren't. But in a country with no financial vocabulary, the distinction between a fund, a bank, and a guy with a briefcase was essentially zero. These companies offered returns of 8% per month, in a country where the state bank was offering 2% per year. 8% per month. Do the math. Actually don't. It'll make you dizzy. People invested. The returns came. Word spread. Then the funds got competitive. Okay, so we're offering 8% a month. Interesting. We're offering 15. Oh yeah? We're offering 25. We're offering 50. 50%? Per month? Per month. And people just believed that? Sir, they were lining up around the block. By the mid-1990s, Albania had roughly a dozen major pyramid schemes operating simultaneously. The biggest ones had names that sounded almost official: Vifa, Gialika, Shafiri, Populi. They had offices, storefronts, branded merchandise. One of them sponsored the Albanian national soccer team. This is not a joke. Here's where it stops being a simple fraud story and becomes something much darker. The Albanian government knew. Not suspected, not vaguely worried. Knew. The International Monetary Fund flagged the schemes as early as 1994. They sent reports. They sent warnings. They sent economists with PowerPoint slides full of words like unsustainable and systemic risk. The Albanian government's response was essentially, "Thank you very much for your concern. Please let yourself out." Why? Because the funds were politically useful. Albania's ruling Democratic Party under President Sali Berisha was in the middle of a complicated, messy transition from communism to capitalism. Unemployment was brutal. Infrastructure was non-existent. Foreign investment was slow. But the pyramid funds? The pyramid funds were making people feel rich. And people who feel rich don't vote out the government. Several of the largest funds had direct ties to the Democratic Party. Some operators were party members. Some funds reportedly helped finance political operations. The exact relationships were murky, deliberately murky, but the pattern was clear. The government didn't build the pyramid schemes. They just made sure nobody knocked them down. This guy's fund is paying people 50% a month. Should we investigate? Is he a political problem for us? No, sir. he's basically a donor. Then, he's basically fine. By 1995, the pyramid schemes weren't just popular, they were a national religion. At their peak, the funds had collected somewhere between $1.2 billion and $2 billion, in a country whose entire GDP was approximately $2.4 billion. Half the economy, inside fake investment funds. Let that sit for a second. Imagine if Americans collectively put $14 trillion into a guy's Venmo because he promised to double it. That's proportionally what happened in Albania. Farmers sold their land to invest. Families sold their apartments. Albanian migrants working in Greece and Italy sending money home for years, building tiny safety nets dollar by dollar, wired their entire savings back to Tirana to get in on the action. The most chilling part? It was working. For the people who got in early, the returns were real, because pyramid schemes always pay early investors. That's literally how they function. You pay old investors with new investor money until there are no new investors left. It's not complicated, it's not clever, it's not new. Charles Ponzi ran the same scheme in Boston in 1920. But in Albania in 1996, with no financial history, no free press worth mentioning, and a government nodding along, it felt like a miracle. My cousin put in $1,000 6 months ago. How much did he get back? $8,000. When's he pulling it out? He's not. He reinvested everything. Smart man. Sir, he is going to lose everything. You sound like my father before he invested. And now? He has a new car and a very smug expression. The funds needed a constant flow of new money to pay existing investors. Basic pyramid math. And, by late 1996, Albania was running out of new investors. Because everyone was already in. The funds started struggling to make payments. Delays of a day, then a week. Then some funds started quietly restructuring terms, reducing interest rates, extending payout schedules. The smart money started whispering. And then the whispers became questions. And then the questions became panic. In November 1996, the Albanian government finally, under massive IMF pressure, declared several of the smaller funds illegal. This was the government's first honest statement about the pyramid schemes in 3 years. It was also the worst possible timing. Because the moment the government admitted some funds were fraudulent, Albanians started asking a very reasonable follow-up question. Which ones? And the answer, which nobody in power wanted to say out loud, was all of them. January 1997. The two largest funds, Vifa and Geopolitics, collapsed within weeks of each other. Not suspended operations, not temporarily paused withdrawals, gone. Offices locked, phones disconnected, operators vanished. Billions of dollars of ordinary Albanian savings gone. The reaction was not measured. Crowds gathered outside locked offices. Crowds became mobs. Mobs became something else entirely. In the south of the country, where investment in the schemes had been heaviest, people didn't just lose their savings. They lost everything. Their homes, their land. The money their parents had spent lifetimes accumulating. They were not in a forgiving mood. Protests erupted in Vlora, the southern port city, in late January. By February, the protests had become an insurrection. And here is the detail that turns this from a financial disaster into something almost cinematic. Albania's government kept its weapons in poorly guarded military depots distributed across the country. When the insurrection spread, those depots were overrun. The population of Albania, furious, broke, and armed, helped themselves to approximately 650,000 Kalashnikovs, 1.5 million hand grenades, and 3.5 billion rounds of ammunition. 3.5 billion rounds. For a country of 3 million people, that's more than 1,000 bullets per person, which is, by any measure, a lot of bullets for a financial dispute. By March 1997, the Albanian state had effectively ceased to function. The army collapsed. Soldiers deserted, some joining the rebels, some simply going home. Police stations were abandoned. Government buildings in the south were burned. The prime minister resigned. President Berisha declared a state of emergency that nobody obeyed. For several weeks, Albania had no functioning government, no functioning military, and approximately 700,000 armed civilians. In the chaos, an estimated 2,000 people died, not in a war, not from a foreign invasion, from a savings account. The international community stared at the situation with the expression of someone who has just watched a car they were supposed to be watching roll down a hill and into a lake. Italy organized a multinational military intervention, Operation Alba, to stabilize the country. France, Greece, Spain, Turkey, Romania sent troops. Basically, Europe looked at Albania and said collectively, "We are going to need a much bigger NATO meeting." When the smoke cleared, the obvious question arrived. Who built the schemes? The operators. Obviously. Men like Remi Seiko and Maksude Kademi, who ran Jalika, collected billions, paid out mountains of fake returns, and fled the country before anyone could ask uncomfortable questions. Most were never meaningfully prosecuted. But the operators didn't do it alone. The IMF had warned the government. The government had ignored the warnings. The government had maintained informal relationships with the funds while they operated. The government had benefited politically from the false prosperity the schemes created, and the government had moved too late, deliberately, arguably to stop them. Was it criminal? Debatable. Was it corrupt? Almost certainly. Was it catastrophically, historically, civilization-shakingly negligent? Absolutely yes. Berisha's Democratic Party lost the 1,997 elections by a historically humiliating margin. He was re-elected later, because Albanian politics is its own extraordinary story. But that's a different video. The fund operators? Some fled. Some were eventually arrested years later. Some are still living comfortably, somewhere with very nice views. The investors received cents on the dollar in eventual government compensation programs. Most received nothing. The farmers who sold their land still don't have the land. Here's what makes Albania not just a historical curiosity but a warning. Every ingredient of the Albanian crisis exists somewhere in the world right now. A population with limited financial literacy and enormous economic anxiety? Check. A new financial system introduced faster than institutions could be built to regulate it? Check. A government that found it politically convenient to let a dangerous fantasy continue? Check. Returns too good to be true? Paid just long enough to silence the skeptics? Check. Albania, in 1996, wasn't uniquely foolish. Albania, in 1996, was uniquely vulnerable. There's a difference. Financial systems don't require stupidity to collapse. They require the right combination of hope, desperation, and a government that has decided its survival matters more than yours. The pyramid scheme wasn't the disease. The pyramid scheme was the symptom. The disease was a country handed capitalism like a blank check with no instructions and told, good luck, the market will figure it out. The market figured it out. It just took 2,000 lives to do it. The bunkers Enver Hoxha built to protect Albania from the world are still there, 750,000 of them, scattered across the countryside. Nobody ever came to destroy Albania from the outside. They didn't need to.